My name is Alex Bennett, and I'm about to tell you how my family tried to bury me alongside my grandfather's coffin. They didn't use shovels, though. They used greed, lies, and 40 years of family business documents they thought I'd never see again. 3 days ago, I walked into Bennett and Associates Construction as the sole owner. 3 weeks ago, they wouldn't even let me speak at his funeral. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning Grandpa Bob was lowered into the ground at Pinewood Cemetery, I watched my brother Marcus shake hands with contractors like he was already running the company. My mother Linda stood beside him, nodding approvingly as he discussed upcoming projects with the mayor. They dressed for a business meeting, not a burial. While the pastor spoke about eternal rest, Marcus was already planning hostile takeovers of the living. I stood at the back of the gathered crowd, wearing the only black suit I owned, watching my family perform grief like a rehearsed play. The truth was, none of them had visited Grandpa Bob in his final months. I'd been the one sitting beside his hospital bed every evening after my shift at the warehouse, listening to his stories about building the company from nothing. I'd been the one holding his weathered hand when he whispered his regrets about how the family had changed. But at his funeral, I was treated like hired help. The reception was held at the Brass Lantern Diner, the same place where Grandpa Bob used to take me for chocolate chip pancakes when I was 8 years old. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched Marcus commandeer the back room, spreading out what he claimed were Grandpa's final business documents across the red vinyl booth tables. The whole scene looked like a corporate merger disguised as mourning. Linda positioned herself at the head of the longest table, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she examined papers with the intensity of an accountant during tax season. She'd always been the family's unofficial treasurer, keeping track of who owed what and when. But today, she wasn't collecting debts. She was dividing an empire. I approached their makeshift command center with my coffee cup in hand, expecting to be included in whatever family meeting was unfolding. After all, I was Bob's grandson too. I'd worked construction summers during high school, learned to read blueprints before I could properly read Shakespeare, and spent countless hours in that cramped office above the equipment yard listening to Grandpa explain the difference between load-bearing dreams and decorative ambitions. Marcus barely glanced up when I pulled out a chair. "This doesn't concern you, Alex," he said, his voice carrying that condescending tone I'd grown to despise over 32 years of family gatherings. "These are business matters." I sat down anyway, setting my coffee on the table with enough force to make the papers flutter. Grandpa Bob was my family too. If you're discussing his affairs, I have a right to know what's happening. Linda removed her glasses and fixed me with the same look she'd given me as a child when I'd tracked mud through her pristine kitchen. "Alex, honey, you work in a warehouse. This is about multi-million-dollar contracts, equipment fleets, and employee responsibilities. It's complicated business that requires experience." The dismissal stung, but not because it was unexpected. My family had perfected the art of making me feel small at gatherings for decades. What hurt was the casual way they erased my connection to Grandpa Bob, as if the countless hours we'd spent together discussing everything from foundation pours to life philosophy meant nothing because I didn't wear a tie to work every day. Nicole, my younger sister, spoke up from her corner of the booth where she'd been scrolling through her phone. "Besides, Alex, you've never shown interest in the business before. Why start now?" That statement revealed how little they actually knew about my relationship with our grandfather. I'd shown plenty of interest, I'd asked questions, offered to help with smaller projects, even suggested improvements to their scheduling system based on logistics work I'd learned at the warehouse. But every conversation had been politely deflected or outright ignored. They wanted me to stay in my lane, and my lane apparently ended at the family driveway. Tyler, our cousin who'd married into money and spent most family functions bragging about his wife's interior design business, leaned forward with the confidence of someone who'd never earned a callus. "The construction industry isn't for everyone, man. It takes a certain kind of vision to see the bigger picture." I watched them sort through documents like carrion birds picking over fresh roadkill. Bank statements, property deeds, equipment titles, and vendor contracts passed between their hands with practiced efficiency. They'd obviously planned this moment long before Grandpa Bob had taken his final breath. This wasn't grief, this was a corporate acquisition wrapped in funeral attire. Marcus pulled out a folder labeled Bennett Associates Succession Planning and spread its contents across the table like he was dealing cards in a high-stakes poker game. Dad was smart about keeping everything organized, he announced to the group. The transition should be seamless. I studied the papers from my awkward angle at the table's edge. Financial statements showed the company's impressive growth over the past decade. The highway construction contract they'd recently secured was worth more than I'd make in 10 lifetimes at the warehouse. Equipment valuations, property assessments, and client lists painted a picture of a thriving business that employed half of Cedar Falls and influenced the other half. But something felt wrong about the documents Marcus was displaying. They looked too clean, too recently organized. Grandpa Bob had always been meticulous about record keeping, but these files seemed almost theatrical in their presentation. The succession planning folder, in particular, looked like it had been assembled yesterday rather than developed over months or years of careful consideration. Linda held up a document that made everyone lean closer. This shows the company structure Bob established. Marcus will assume the role of president and majority shareholder, Nicole gets the property management division, and Tyler will handle vendor relations and equipment procurement. I waited for my name to appear in their reading of Grandpa's final wishes. Surely there was something, some small recognition of my place in the family business, even if it was just a ceremonial title or a minor percentage of shares. The silence stretched on like a held breath. Finally, I asked the question that was burning in my throat. What about me? Marcus looked up from the papers with genuine confusion, as if I'd asked about inheriting the moon. What about you? Where do I fit in this succession plan? What did Grandpa Bob leave for me? The table went quiet. Linda folded the document carefully and placed it back in the folder. Nicole stopped scrolling on her phone. Tyler suddenly became very interested in his coffee cup. The weight of their collective discomfort settled over the booth like fog. Linda cleared her throat delicately. Alex, sweetheart, you have to understand. Bob knew that everyone has different strengths. You're doing well at the warehouse, building your own career path. He wouldn't have wanted to burden you with business responsibilities that might interfere with your independence. The explanation sounded rehearsed, like they'd practiced delivering this particular rejection. But beneath Linda's gentle tone, I heard the real message. I wasn't considered capable of handling family business. I was the warehouse worker, the family member who'd somehow failed to live up to Bennett's standards, despite never being given a real opportunity to prove otherwise. Marcus resumed shuffling papers with renewed purpose.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Besides Alex, the construction business is incredibly demanding. It requires constant attention, relationship management with clients and subcontractors, and the ability to make decisions that affect dozens of employees. It's not something you can just step into. His words carried the implication that my warehouse experience was somehow lesser, that coordinating shipments and managing inventory systems was child's play compared to the sophisticated world of construction management. Never mind that I'd been successfully handling logistics for a company that supplied 3 different states, or that I understood project scheduling better than most people understood their own calendars. I stood up from the booth, my coffee growing cold as anger heated my chest. So that's it. 40 years of Grandpa building this company, and I get nothing because you've decided I'm not qualified. Nicole finally looked up from her phone, her expression a mixture of pity and impatience. Alex, it's not personal. It's just practical. We all have different roles in the family, but it was personal. Every dismissive comment, every excluded conversation, every assumption about my capabilities or ambitions had been deeply personal. They'd spent decades treating me like the family's consolation prize, the Bennett who'd somehow missed the genetic lottery for business acumen and social climbing. I left them to their document sorting and walked outside into the Cedar Falls afternoon. The Brass Lanterns parking lot was filled with pickup trucks and sedans belonging to the construction workers and office staff who'd come to pay their respects to Bob Bennett. These were people who'd actually worked alongside my grandfather, who'd built roads and homes and commercial buildings under his guidance. They understood the difference between theoretical business knowledge and practical construction wisdom. Jamie Collins, Grandpa Bob's former project foreman, was leaning against his truck smoking a cigarette when I emerged from the diner. Jamie had worked for Bennett & Associates for 15 years before starting his own smaller operation. He'd known me since I was a teenager, had taught me how to properly use a level and read grade stakes during those summer jobs that my family now pretended had never happened. "Rough day," Jamie observed, exhaling smoke toward the cloudy sky. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without revealing too much frustration. "Your grandfather talked about you a lot toward the end," Jamie continued. "Especially these past few months, when he wasn't feeling well. He was proud of what you'd accomplished at the warehouse, said you understood logistics and planning better than most people in the construction business." The comment caught me off guard. Grandpa Bob had never expressed that kind of praise directly to me. He said that. Jamie dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot heel. "Bob Bennett didn't give compliments lightly, Alex. He saw potential in you that maybe you didn't even see in yourself. That's why it surprised me when Marcus started making announcements about running the company. I figured Bob would have included you in the succession planning somehow." I glanced back toward the diner, where my family was still dividing their inheritance, like generals planning territorial conquest. Apparently not. But Jamie's words planted a seed of doubt about the documents Marcus had displayed so confidently. If Grandpa Bob had respected my abilities enough to praise them to his employees, why would his final business arrangements completely exclude me? The succession planning folder had looked suspiciously pristine for something that should have been developed over months of careful consideration. That evening, I drove to the old Bennett family home on Maple Street where Grandpa Bob had lived alone since Grandpa passed 5 years earlier. The Victorian house sat dark and empty, its wraparound porch sagging slightly under the weight of 40 Ohio winters. Linda had mentioned earlier that they planned to sell the property to help fund the business transition, another decision made without consulting me. I used the spare key Grandpa had given me months earlier, back when I'd been helping him with yard work and small repairs around the house. The interior smelled like coffee and Old Spice aftershave, familiar scents that made his absence feel fresh and raw all over again. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was looking for answers. Grandpa Bob's home office occupied a small room off the main hallway, its walls lined with built-in bookshelves that held everything from construction manuals to mystery novels. His desk sat positioned beneath a window that overlooked the backyard, where he'd taught me to throw a baseball when I was 7 years old. If he'd kept personal copies of important business documents, they would be in this room. I started with the filing cabinet beside his desk, working through folders labeled with various business categories: tax returns, insurance policies, equipment maintenance records, and employee information filled the drawers in Bob's characteristically organized fashion. But I wasn't finding anything that resembled succession planning or inheritance documentation. Then I noticed something odd about the desk itself. The bottom drawer seemed shallower than the others, as if it didn't extend as far back into the desk cavity. I pulled it completely out, and discovered a second compartment hidden behind the regular drawer space. Inside was a manila envelope, marked personal important in Grandpa Bob's careful handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside were several documents that made my heart race with each page I turned. The first was a copy of Bob Bennett's actual last will and testament, dated just 6 months earlier and bearing the official seal of Richardson and Partners law firm. The second was a letter addressed specifically to me, written in Grandpa's familiar script. The will told a story completely different from the narrative my family had constructed at the diner. According to the legal document in my hands, Robert Bennett had left the majority ownership of Bennett Associates Construction to his grandson Alex Bennett, along with the family home and most of his personal assets. Marcus, Nicole, and Tyler were mentioned in the will, but their inheritances consisted of smaller cash bequests rather than business ownership. The letter explained his reasoning in words that brought tears to my eyes. Grandpa Bob had watched me handle responsibility and treat people with respect throughout my warehouse career. He'd seen me work without complaint during those teenage summers, learning every aspect of construction from foundation to finish work. Most importantly, he'd recognized that I understood the human side of business, the part that involved treating employees fairly and building relationships based on trust rather than manipulation. He'd also suspected that other family members viewed Bennett and Associates primarily as a financial opportunity rather than a legacy built on honest work and community service. The letter expressed his concern that Marcus and Linda would prioritize profits over people, potentially destroying the company culture he'd spent 4 decades developing. But the most shocking revelation was contained in the final paragraph of his letter. Grandpa Bob had deliberately kept me unaware of his inheritance plans because he suspected that other family members might attempt to pressure or manipulate me if they knew about the will's contents. He'd wanted to protect both me and the business from the kind of family drama that could destroy both relationships and livelihoods. I sat in his office chair, reading the letter twice to make sure I understood its implications. My grandfather had trusted me with his life's work, but he'd also burdened me with the knowledge that my family had been planning to exclude me entirely from his legacy. The documents Marcus had shown at the diner weren't legitimate succession planning. They were either fabricated entirely or represented some kind of preliminary discussion that had never been finalized. The question now was what to do with this information. I could confront my family directly, but that would likely result in accusations and denials that could tear apart whatever remained of our relationships. I could consult with David Richardson, the attorney whose name appeared on the will, but that felt like declaring war before attempting diplomacy. Instead, I decided to make copies of everything and return the originals to their hiding place. If my family was going to proceed with their unauthorized takeover of Grandpa Bob's business, they would eventually discover that their plans conflicted with legal reality. When that moment came, I wanted to be prepared with documentation and hopefully legal representation. The drive home that night felt like traveling through a different world than the one I'd inhabited that morning. I was no longer Alex Bennett, the warehouse worker who'd been excluded from family business discussions. I was Alex Bennett, the primary beneficiary of a construction empire, the grandson who'd been chosen to carry forward a 4-decade legacy of honest work and community service. But I was also Alex Bennett, the family member whose relatives had just revealed their true opinion of his worth and capabilities. The knowledge of their dismissive attitudes hurt worse than complete exclusion would have. They hadn't just forgotten to include me in their plans, they had actively decided that I didn't deserve consideration. The next morning brought a phone call from Marcus that confirmed my suspicions about their intentions. He'd obviously spent the previous evening organizing his takeover strategy, because his voice carried the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Alex, I wanted to follow up on yesterday's conversation at the diner. We'll be meeting with the attorney tomorrow to finalize the business transition. I know this might be difficult to understand, but Dad really did want what was best for everyone in the family. I gripped the phone tighter, fighting the urge to reveal what I'd discovered in Grandpa's office. What exactly needs to be finalized, Marcus? Just paperwork mostly, transferring accounts, updating business licenses, that sort of thing. Dad kept everything in his name, so we need to establish the new ownership structure officially. The casual way he discussed establishing ownership revealed that he genuinely believed the succession planning documents from the diner represented Bob Bennett's final wishes. Either Marcus was an accomplished liar, or he'd somehow convinced himself that his version of inheritance planning was legitimate. I'd like to be there when you meet with the attorney, I said. The pause that followed lasted long enough for me to hear Marcus breathing on the other end of the line. Alex, I don't think that's necessary. Like I said, it's just paperwork. Boring legal stuff that doesn't really affect you. It affects me if it's about Grandpa Bob's estate. I'm part of this family too. Another pause, followed by Marcus clearing his throat. Okay, fine. But please understand that this meeting is about business operations, not family sentiment. David Richardson is a busy man, and we need to keep things focused and professional. The condescension in his tone made it clear that he viewed my attendance as an unwelcome complication rather than a legitimate family right, but his agreement to let me attend the meeting also suggested that he wasn't expecting any surprises from the legal consultation. Marcus genuinely believed he was operating within the boundaries of Bob Bennett's final wishes. That realization made me wonder whether someone had deliberately misled my family about the inheritance arrangements, or whether they'd simply made assumptions based on incomplete information. Either way, tomorrow's meeting with David Richardson would reveal the truth about Grandpa Bob's legacy and my place within it. I spent that evening researching everything I could find about estate law and business succession planning. If tomorrow was going to be a confrontation, I wanted to understand the legal framework that governed inheritance disputes. The more I learned, the more confident I became that the documents hidden in Grandpa's desk represented his legitimate final wishes, while the papers Marcus had displayed at the diner were either outdated or fabricated entirely. By the time I went to bed that night, I'd made peace with the possibility that tomorrow might permanently fracture my relationships with Marcus, Linda, Nicole, and Tyler. But I'd also accepted that those relationships had never been as strong or genuine as I'd hoped they were. Family members who could casually exclude me from a business succession discussion weren't people who'd valued my presence in their lives to begin with. The truth about Grandpa Bob's will would change everything, but it wouldn't change who any of us really were underneath the polite facades we'd maintained at family gatherings. Tomorrow would simply reveal what had always been true about the Bennett family dynamics. Some of us had been playing games while others had been building genuine relationships. As I fell asleep, I thought about Jamie Collins' comment regarding Grandpa Bob's respect for my abilities and potential. Perhaps the old man had seen something in me that I hadn't fully recognized in myself. Perhaps inheriting his business wasn't just about receiving property and assets, but about accepting responsibility for continuing his approach to honest work and fair treatment of others. If that was the case, then tomorrow's meeting wasn't just about claiming my inheritance. It was about proving that Grandpa Bob's faith in me had been justified, and that I was ready to honor his legacy regardless of how my family responded to the truth about his final wishes. Part 2. The attorney's office. The Richardson and Partners law firm occupied the third floor of the tallest building in downtown Cedar Falls, a modest 6-story structure that overlooked the Scioto River and the industrial district where Bennett Associates kept their equipment yard. I arrived 15 minutes early, partly from nervousness and partly because I wanted to observe my family's behavior before the meeting began. David Richardson's waiting room felt like a cross between a library and a funeral parlor, all dark wood paneling and burgundy leather chairs that had probably been purchased sometime during the Reagan administration. Legal journals lined built-in bookcases, and framed diplomas covered the walls like academic trophies. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain, greeted me with professional courtesy that suggested she'd witnessed plenty of family drama within these walls. Marcus arrived precisely on time, wearing his best navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive enough to fund a small construction project. He nodded at me curtly, but didn't attempt conversation, choosing instead to study his phone with the intense concentration of someone reviewing battle plans. Linda followed 5 minutes later, dressed in black as if she were still attending funeral services. Nicole appeared last, slightly breathless and apologetic about traffic delays. The family assembled in Richardson's waiting room, like actors preparing for a play none of us had properly rehearsed. The tension was subtle but unmistakable, the kind of atmospheric pressure that builds before thunderstorms. Marcus checked his watch repeatedly. Linda smoothed her skirt and reorganized her purse contents twice. Nicole scrolled through social media posts with nervous energy. I sat quietly in my corner chair, running through different scenarios for how the meeting might unfold. If my grandfather's hidden will was legitimate and current, then David Richardson would have to inform my family that their succession planning documents were either outdated or invalid. The confrontation would happen naturally, without requiring me to reveal what I'd discovered in Bob's home office. But if Richardson had no knowledge of the will I'd found, or if that document had somehow been superseded by more recent arrangements, then I'd need to decide whether to produce the hidden papers or allow my family to proceed with their takeover plans. The uncertainty made my palms sweat, and my stomach churn with acidic anxiety. David Richardson emerged from his inner office at exactly 10 o'clock, a tall man in his 60s with perfectly white hair, and the kind of authoritative presence that courtroom lawyers develop over decades of practice. He shook hands with each of us, offering condolences about Bob's passing, while maintaining the emotional distance that professional legal consultations required. His office was larger than the waiting room, but decorated with the same conservative aesthetic. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the space, surrounded by matching chairs arranged in a semicircle that suggested Richardson regularly hosted family meetings. Diplomas, bar association certificates, and photographs of Richardson with various local politicians covered the walls, establishing his credentials and community connections. Richardson settled behind his desk and opened a thick file folder that contained what appeared to be several hundred pages of documents. He adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat before beginning what sounded like a prepared statement. Before we proceed with today's discussion, I want to express my sincere condolences on the loss of Robert Bennett. Bob was not only a valued client, but a respected member of our community. His contributions to Cedar Falls, through Bennett Associates Construction, will be felt for generations to come. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, eager to move beyond pleasantries and into business matters. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. We appreciate everything you've done to help our family during this difficult time. I believe you have the succession planning documents that Dad prepared. Richardson's expression shifted slightly, a subtle change that suggested surprise or confusion. He flipped through several pages in the file folder before responding. Mr. Bennett, I'm not sure what succession planning documents you're referring to. Could you be more specific about what materials you'd like to discuss? The question hung in the air like smoke from a backfiring engine. Marcus glanced at Linda, then back at Richardson, clearly expecting a different response. The business transition paperwork, the documents outlining how Bennett and Associates will be managed after Dad's passing, the ownership transfer arrangements. Richardson removed his glasses and cleaned them carefully, a gesture that seemed designed to buy time for consideration. I'm afraid there may be some misunderstanding. Robert Bennett's estate planning consists primarily of his last will and testament, along with various property deeds and financial account information. There aren't separate business succession documents beyond what's outlined in the will itself. Linda spoke up, her voice carrying a note of maternal authority that she'd perfected over decades of managing family crises. Mr. Richardson, perhaps there's been some confusion with filing or organization. We have copies of the succession planning materials that Bob prepared. They clearly outline the business transition arrangements. She reached into her purse and produced a manila folder containing the same documents Marcus had displayed at the Brass Lantern Diner. The papers looked even more suspicious under the harsh fluorescent lighting of Richardson's office, too clean and recent to represent months of careful estate planning. Richardson accepted the folder and examined its contents with the methodical attention of someone trained to spot discrepancies in legal documentation. His expression grew increasingly serious as he reviewed each page, occasionally making small notes on a yellow legal pad. After several minutes of uncomfortable silence, Richardson looked up from the documents with the grave expression of a doctor delivering terminal diagnosis. I'm afraid these materials don't appear to be legitimate estate planning documents. The formatting is incorrect, the legal language is imprecise, and most importantly, they don't bear any official seals or witness signatures required for valid succession planning. Marcus's face flushed red, a combination of embarrassment and anger that made his neck veins visible above his shirt collar. That's impossible. Dad specifically told us about these arrangements. We discussed the business transition multiple times over the past year. Perhaps Robert mentioned potential plans or preliminary ideas, Richardson replied diplomatically. But discussing possibilities isn't the same as executing legal documents. Estate planning requires specific procedures, witness requirements, and notarization to be valid. Nicole shifted uncomfortably in her chair, finally understanding that their assumption about inheriting the family business had been built on quicksand rather than solid legal foundation. So what does that mean for the company? Who's responsible for Bennett and Associates now? Richardson turned to a different section of his file folder, removing a document that I recognized immediately as the will I'd discovered in Grandpa Bob's hidden desk compartment. My heart began racing as I realized that the confrontation I'd been dreading was about to unfold naturally, without requiring any revelation from me. Robert Bennett's actual last will and testament was executed 6 months ago and properly witnessed according to Ohio state law, Richardson announced. The document clearly outlines his wishes regarding both personal property and business assets. He cleared his throat and began reading from the official document. I, Robert James Bennett, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the majority ownership of Bennett and Associates Construction, consisting of 65% of company shares, all associated equipment and operational control, to my grandson Alexander James Bennett. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the wall clock ticking and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Marcus stared at Richardson as if the attorney had suddenly begun speaking a foreign language. Linda's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Nicole looked back and forth between me and the document as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Richardson continued reading. To my son Marcus Bennett, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my personal tool collection. To my daughter-in-law Linda Bennett, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my collection of first edition construction and engineering textbooks. To my granddaughter Nicole Bennett, I leave the sum of $25,000 and my grandmother's jewelry collection. Marcus found his voice first, though it came out as a strangled whisper. That can't be right. Dad never mentioned making Alex the primary beneficiary. There has to be some mistake. Richardson shook his head firmly. There's no mistake. This will was prepared in my office, witnessed by 2 of my staff members, and properly notarized. It supersedes any previous estate planning documents Robert may have created. Linda turned to stare at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, betrayal, and dawning realization. Alex, did you know about this? Did Grandpa Bob tell you he was leaving you the business? The question put me in an impossible position. If I admitted to discovering the will in Bob's desk, my family would know I'd been keeping secrets during our previous conversations. But if I claimed complete ignorance, I'd be lying at a moment when honesty seemed crucial for any hope of maintaining family relationships. I chose a middle path that was technically truthful while avoiding the most inflammatory details. Grandpa Bob never specifically told me he was planning to leave me the company. We talked about the business sometimes, but he never discussed his will or estate planning with me directly. Marcus stood up from his chair abruptly, pacing toward the window that overlooked downtown Cedar Falls. This is insane. Alex doesn't know anything about running a construction company. He works in a warehouse, for God's sake. Dad must have been confused or manipulated somehow. Richardson's tone became noticeably colder at the suggestion that he'd participated in elder manipulation. Mr. Bennett, I can assure you that your father was completely lucid and decisive when he executed this will. We discussed his reasoning extensively, and he was very clear about his intentions. What reasoning? Nicole asked, her voice small and confused. Why would Grandpa Bob choose Alex over the rest of us? Richardson consulted his notes before responding. Robert expressed several concerns about the direction Bennett and Associates might take under different leadership scenarios. He felt that Alex demonstrated qualities of integrity, work ethic, and respect for employees that would best preserve the company culture he'd spent 40 years developing. The explanation felt both validating and burdensome. Grandpa Bob had seen something in me that my family had consistently overlooked, but his faith in my abilities also meant accepting responsibility for a business that employed dozens of people and influenced the economic health of Cedar Falls. Linda's shock was transforming into anger, her voice rising with each word. "This is ridiculous. Alex has never shown any interest in the construction business. He's never even asked to be involved in company operations." "Actually, Mom, that's not true," I said quietly. "I asked to be included in business discussions many times over the years. I offered to help with projects, suggested improvements to scheduling systems, even volunteered to work part-time in the office. Every suggestion was politely dismissed or ignored." Marcus whirled around from the window, his face now completely red with fury. "You're seriously going to sit there and act like we excluded you? You never made any real effort to learn the business. You were perfectly happy working your warehouse job and living your simple little life." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to feel personal. I had been content with my warehouse career, largely because my family had made it clear that Bennett and Associates wasn't a place where I'd be welcomed or valued. Their dismissive attitudes had become self-fulfilling prophecy, convincing me that I lacked the qualifications for construction work. But Grandpa Bob had apparently seen through the family dynamics that had shaped my career choices. His will suggested that he understood I'd been systematically discouraged from pursuing involvement in the family business, and that my supposed lack of interest had been manufactured by other people's assumptions about my capabilities. Richardson intervened before the family argument could escalate further. "Perhaps we should focus on practical matters. Alex, as the primary beneficiary and majority owner of Bennett and Associates, you'll need to decide how you want to proceed with business operations. The company has ongoing contracts, employee obligations, and operational responsibilities that require immediate attention." The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat. 40 years of Bob Bennett's work, dozens of employee livelihoods, and millions of dollars in contracted projects were now my responsibility. The warehouse logistics experience that my family had dismissed as irrelevant suddenly seemed inadequate for managing a construction empire. "I'll need time to understand the current situation," I said. "Can you provide me with financial statements, contract information, and employee records? I want to review everything before making any major decisions." Marcus laughed bitterly. "You'll need more than time, Alex. You'll need years of experience that you don't have. Construction management isn't something you can learn from reading files. It requires relationships with subcontractors, understanding of building codes, knowledge of equipment operations, and the ability to manage complex project timelines." His criticism was accurate, but it also revealed the assumption that had always limited my family's perception of my potential. They viewed the construction business as some mystical art that required secret knowledge unavailable to outsiders, rather than a logical extension of project management and organizational skills I'd already developed in other industries. Richardson handed me a business card and a thick folder containing what appeared to be hundreds of pages of documentation. "Alex, I'd recommend scheduling a follow-up meeting once you've had time to review these materials. You may also want to consider consulting with an accountant and possibly retaining separate legal counsel for business matters." The suggestion of separate legal representation made it clear that Richardson understood this family meeting had created potential conflicts of interest. My inheritance of Bennett and Associates had transformed me from a family member into a business owner whose interests might not align with my relatives' expectations or desires. Linda stood up from her chair with the dignity of someone leaving a disappointing theater performance. I think we've heard enough for today. Alex, I hope you understand the position this puts the entire family in. Your grandfather may have had his reasons, but this decision affects all of us. The comment carried an implicit threat wrapped in maternal concern. Linda was serving notice that my acceptance of Bob's inheritance would be viewed as a hostile act against family unity rather than a legitimate recognition of his final wishes. Nicole gathered her purse and jacket, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. This is so awkward. I mean, congratulations, Alex, I guess, but this definitely wasn't what any of us expected. Marcus was the last to leave Richardson's office, pausing at the door to deliver what felt like both a warning and a promise. Don't think this is over, Alex. Dad may have written your name on some papers, but running Bennett Associates requires knowledge and relationships that you don't possess. You'll be back begging us for help within 6 months. After my family departed, Richardson and I sat in his office reviewing the practical implications of Bob's will. The construction company's financial health was better than I'd expected, with strong cash flow, minimal debt, and a reputation that had generated steady work for decades. The recent highway contract was worth nearly $3 million over 2 years, enough to secure the company's financial future if managed properly. But Richardson also warned me about the challenges of assuming control of a business where I'd had no previous involvement. Key employees might question my authority or competence. Longtime clients might worry about continuity of service. Subcontractors and suppliers might demand different payment terms or contract modifications based on uncertainty about new management capabilities. The legal complexities alone were overwhelming. Environmental regulations, worker safety requirements, bonding and insurance obligations, and union contract negotiations required expertise I'd need to develop quickly or delegate to qualified professionals. The learning curve would be steep, and mistakes could be costly both financially and legally. As I drove home that evening with boxes of business documents filling my back seat, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been a warehouse worker whose family considered him incapable of handling complex responsibilities. Tonight, I was the owner of a multi-million-dollar construction company with obligations to dozens of employees and their families. The transformation felt surreal, like waking up to discover I'd been cast in a movie without receiving the script. But beneath the anxiety and uncertainty, I felt something I'd rarely experienced in family contexts: validation. Grandpa Bob had seen potential in me that others had missed or dismissed. His faith in my abilities was both a gift and a challenge. The question now was whether I could prove worthy of his confidence while navigating the family dynamics that his decision had undoubtedly disrupted permanently. Marcus's parting threat suggested that my relatives would view my success as their failure, creating ongoing conflict that might never be fully resolved. But as I unloaded the business documents from my car and carried them into my small apartment, I realized that proving myself to my family was no longer my primary concern. Grandpa Bob's legacy deserved someone who would honor his commitment to honest work, fair treatment of employees, and service to the Cedar Falls community. Whether I was capable of fulfilling that responsibility remained to be seen, but I was determined to try. The first step would be learning everything possible about Bennett & Associates' current operations, financial situation, and contractual obligations. The second step would be meeting with key employees to assess their concerns and capabilities. The third step would be developing a transition plan that maintained business continuity while allowing me to gradually assume operational control. Those were logical, manageable tasks that built on skills I'd already developed through warehouse management. The emotional challenges of family conflict and community skepticism would be harder to address, but they were secondary to the practical responsibilities of keeping a successful business operating effectively. That night, as I spread financial statements and contract documents across my kitchen table, I thought about the letter Grandpa Bob had written explaining his decision to name me as his primary beneficiary. He'd trusted me to preserve something he'd spent 4 decades building, but he'd also burdened me with the knowledge that my family would likely view his choice as a betrayal of their expectations and ambitions. The inheritance was both an opportunity and a test. Success would validate Bob's faith in my abilities and provide financial security I'd never imagined possible. Failure would destroy his legacy and confirm my family's doubts about my competence. The stakes couldn't have been higher, but the challenge was exactly the kind of complex logistics problem I'd been solving in different contexts for years. Tomorrow would bring my first day as owner of Bennett Associates Construction, whether I felt ready or not. Part 3. Walking into the Lion's Den. The Bennett Associates Construction office building looked different when I pulled into the parking lot at 7:30 Monday morning. What had once been my grandfather's domain now belonged to me, though the weight of that ownership felt more like a burden than a blessing. The single-story brick structure sat adjacent to the equipment yard where bulldozers, excavators, and dump trucks waited in neat rows like sleeping giants. I'd spent the weekend reviewing every document Richardson had provided, creating spreadsheets to track ongoing projects, and researching construction industry regulations until my eyes burned from screen glare. The financial picture was encouraging but complex, with multiple revenue streams from residential development, commercial building, and municipal contracts. The highway project alone represented nearly 40% of the company's current workload. The front entrance opened into a reception area that hadn't been updated since the early 90s, all beige carpet and wood grain furniture that screamed small-town practicality over modern aesthetics. Patricia Wong, the office manager who'd worked for Grandpa Bob for over 2 decades, looked up from her computer with the expression of someone who'd been expecting this moment but dreading it nonetheless. Patricia was a woman in her late 50s with graying black hair pulled into a practical bun and the kind of organized efficiency that kept complex businesses running smoothly. She'd known me since childhood but had always maintained professional boundaries that acknowledged her role as an employee rather than a family friend. This morning, those boundaries would be tested by my new position as her employer. "Good morning, Alex," she said carefully, her tone revealing nothing about her feelings regarding the ownership transition. "I heard about the will reading on Friday. I imagine this is all quite overwhelming." I set my briefcase down next to the reception desk, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Good morning, Patricia. Yes, it's definitely a big change. I was hoping we could sit down this morning and discuss the current situation. I need to understand how everything operates before I start making any decisions." She nodded and gestured toward the hallway that led to the administrative offices. "Bob's office is ready for you. I've pulled the files you'll need to review, and I've scheduled individual meetings with the department supervisors for this afternoon. They're all anxious to meet with you and discuss ongoing projects." The casual way she mentioned Bob's office being ready for me suggested that Patricia had been preparing for this transition longer than anyone else in the organization. While my family had been planning their unauthorized takeover, the person who actually managed daily operations had been quietly ensuring business continuity regardless of ownership changes. Grandpa Bob's office occupied the corner of the building with windows overlooking both the equipment yard and the main road leading into Cedar Falls. The space was larger than I'd expected, with a massive oak desk, built-in filing cabinets, and walls covered with framed photographs documenting 40 years of construction projects. Bridges, schools, shopping centers, and residential developments created a visual history of Bob Bennett's contribution to regional development. Patricia had arranged several neat stacks of files on the desk, each labeled with different aspects of company operations. Project summaries, employee records, vendor contracts, and financial reports created a paper mountain that would require days to fully comprehend. But she'd also prepared a single-page summary that outlined the most pressing issues requiring immediate attention. 3 major projects were currently in progress, each at different stages of completion and each presenting unique challenges. The highway contract was running slightly behind schedule due to recent weather delays, but the client relationship remained strong and the profit margins were healthy. A residential development on the east side of town was ahead of schedule, but dealing with soil composition issues that might require design modifications. A commercial building renovation downtown was on track, but dependent on specialized materials that had been delayed by supply chain problems. Beyond the immediate project concerns, Patricia's summary highlighted several personnel issues that would require careful handling. 2 experienced foremen were approaching retirement age and needed succession planning. A newer employee had been involved in a minor safety incident that required follow-up training. The equipment maintenance supervisor had submitted a proposal for upgrading several aging machines that would require significant capital investment. As I reviewed these operational details, I began to appreciate the complexity of managing a construction business. Every project involved multiple moving parts, from labor scheduling and material procurement to regulatory compliance and client communication. The logistics were similar to warehouse management, but amplified by weather dependencies, safety regulations, and the permanent nature of construction mistakes. Patricia knocked on the office door at 9 o'clock, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver difficult news. "Alex, I need to let you know that we've had some calls this morning from clients and subcontractors. Word is getting around about the ownership change, and people have questions." I invited her to sit in one of the chairs facing the desk, recognizing that her insights would be crucial for navigating the transition period. "What kind of questions are they asking?" She consulted a small notebook where she'd apparently been tracking the morning's communications. "Mostly concerns about project continuity and whether existing contracts will be honored. A few people have asked directly about your experience level and whether you plan to maintain current business practices." The questions weren't unexpected, but they highlighted the challenge of assuming control of a business where my reputation was essentially non-existent. In the warehouse industry, I'd spent years building relationships with suppliers, carriers, and customers who trusted my competence based on demonstrated performance. At Bennett Associates, I was starting from zero, with stakeholders who had legitimate concerns about leadership continuity. "How do you think I should handle these concerns?" I asked Patricia, genuinely seeking her advice rather than testing her loyalty. She leaned forward slightly, her professional demeanor softening into something more personal. "Honestly, Alex, you need to be visible and accessible. People in the construction industry value face-to-face relationships and straight talk. If you hide in this office trying to learn everything from paperwork, clients and subcontractors will assume you're not capable of managing their projects." The advice made sense, but also terrified me. My instinct was to master the technical details before engaging with stakeholders, but Patricia was suggesting that relationship management was more important than procedural expertise. The construction business apparently operated on trust and personal connections rather than just competence and efficiency. "I've scheduled meetings with all the department supervisors this afternoon," Patricia continued. "But I'd also recommend visiting the active job sites this week. The crew chiefs need to see you, and the clients need to know you're personally invested in their projects." Before I could respond, the front door chimed, and voices echoed from the reception area. Patricia glanced toward the hallway with an expression that suggested she recognized the visitors and wasn't pleased about their arrival. That sounds like Marcus and your mother. They don't have an appointment, but they're asking to speak with you. The confrontation I'd been expecting had arrived sooner than anticipated. My family had obviously spent the weekend developing the response to Friday's will reading, and they decided to challenge my authority directly rather than accepting the legal reality of Bob's inheritance decisions. I followed Patricia to the reception area, where Marcus and Linda stood near the front desk, both dressed in business attire that seemed calculated to project authority and competence. Marcus wore a charcoal suit with a red tie that made him look like a politician running for office. Linda had chosen a navy blazer and pearls that suggested corporate boardroom rather than construction office. "Good morning, Alex," Linda said, with forced brightness that didn't reach her eyes. "We were hoping we could have a conversation about the transition situation. There are some practical matters we need to discuss." Marcus stepped forward before I could respond, his body language aggressive, despite his polite words. "Alex, we've spent the weekend thinking about Friday's revelation, and we're concerned about the company's stability during this ownership change. We'd like to propose a collaborative approach that protects everyone's interests." The careful phrasing couldn't disguise what was essentially an ultimatum delivered in diplomatic language. They'd come to negotiate terms for my surrender of control, probably offering me some face-saving arrangement that would allow them to manage the business while I retained nominal ownership. Patricia excused herself diplomatically, returning to her desk but remaining within earshot of our conversation. Her presence provided a buffer that prevented the discussion from becoming too personal or emotional, while her obvious attention made it clear that office staff would witness whatever transpired. "What kind of collaborative approach are you thinking about?" I asked, genuinely curious about their strategy. Linda opened her purse and removed a folder containing what appeared to be several pages of typed documents. "We've prepared a management agreement that would allow you to maintain ownership while delegating operational control to family members with relevant experience. Marcus would handle project management and client relations, I would oversee financial administration, and you could focus on long-term strategic planning." The proposal was cleverly constructed to sound reasonable while effectively stripping me of any meaningful authority over day-to-day operations. Strategic planning was code for powerless figurehead, the kind of role corporate boards created for family members who needed titles but couldn't be trusted with real responsibility. Marcus elaborated on their offer with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the negotiating leverage. "Alex, you have to understand that construction management requires years of experience and established relationships. Clients need to trust that their projects will be completed on time and within budget. Subcontractors need to know they'll be paid promptly and treated fairly. You can't just walk in here and expect to manage those relationships effectively." His criticism stung because it contained enough truth to feel personal. I didn't have established relationships with Bennett Associates clients or subcontractors. I couldn't estimate project timelines or material costs based on experience. I'd never managed construction crews or navigated the complex regulations that governed building projects. But Marcus's argument also revealed the fundamental assumption that had always limited my family's perception of my capabilities. They viewed business management as some mystical art that required secret knowledge unavailable to outsiders, rather than a logical extension of organizational and leadership skills that could be learned and developed. "I appreciate your concerns," I replied carefully, "but I think it's premature to make major structural changes before I've had a chance to understand current operations. Grandpa Bob must have had reasons for his inheritance decisions, and I owe it to his memory to at least attempt to fulfill his expectations." Linda's expression shifted from diplomatic to impatient, her voice taking on the maternal authority she'd used to settle childhood disputes. "Alex,
Honey, this isn't about hurt feelings or family politics. This is about protecting a business that employs 50 people and supports their families. Your grandfather may have had sentimental reasons for naming you in his will, but sentiment doesn't qualify.
Someone to manage complex construction projects. The dismissal of Bob's decision as sentimental revealed how little my family understood about his character and business philosophy. Grandpa Bob had been one of the most practical and unsentimental people I'd ever known, someone who made decisions based on careful observation and logical analysis rather than emotional preferences. Marcus sensed my resistance to their proposal and shifted tactics, adopting a more threatening tone. Alex, you need to be realistic about this situation. If you insist on trying to manage operations yourself, you'll probably destroy the business within a year. Clients will cancel contracts, employees will quit, and subcontractors will demand cash payments instead of credit terms. Is your pride really worth destroying Dad's legacy? The accusation that pride was motivating my decisions felt particularly unfair given that I'd spent decades accepting my family's low expectations without complaint. But Marcus's threat also revealed his assumption that I would inevitably fail, that my incompetence was so predictable that business failure was guaranteed rather than merely possible. Patricia cleared her throat diplomatically, drawing our attention to the fact that other office staff were beginning to arrive for the workday. The timing reminded me that this family confrontation was taking place in a professional environment where employee morale and confidence were important considerations. I think we should continue this conversation in my office, I said, leading Marcus and Linda down the hallway while Patricia handled phone calls and morning administrative tasks. Once we were seated in Bob's office with the door closed, Marcus resumed his argument with renewed intensity. Alex, let's cut through the diplomatic language and be honest about the situation. You don't have the experience, knowledge, or relationships necessary to run this company successfully. Dad may have put your name on the ownership papers, but that doesn't magically transform you into a construction manager. Linda nodded in agreement, her voice softer but equally firm. We're not trying to cheat you out of your inheritance, sweetheart. We're trying to protect it. Under our management agreement, you'd receive all the financial benefits of ownership while we handle the operational responsibilities. Everyone wins. Their offer was superficially generous, but it was also based on the assumption that I was incapable of learning and growing into the role Bob had envisioned for me. They were essentially offering to be my caretakers, managing my inheritance because they believed I lacked the competence to manage it myself. What if I want to try? I asked. What if I want to spend the next 6 months learning the business and working with existing staff to maintain continuity? Would you be willing to support that effort instead of undermining it? Marcus laughed bitterly. Support it how? By standing around watching you make expensive mistakes while clients lose confidence and employees look for other jobs? Alex, this isn't a simulation or a training program. These are real projects with real deadlines and real financial consequences. His response revealed that he viewed my potential failure as inevitable rather than preventable, that he was unwilling to provide guidance or assistance that might improve my chances of success. Marcus wanted me to fail quickly and dramatically so that his assumption about my incompetence would be validated. Linda tried a different approach, appealing to family loyalty rather than business logic. Alex, we're trying to find a solution that keeps the family together while protecting everyone's interests. If you insist on trying to manage the company alone, it will create ongoing conflict and resentment that could permanently damage our relationships. The irony of her concern about family relationships wasn't lost on me. They'd already demonstrated their willingness to exclude me from inheritance discussions and dismiss my capabilities without consideration. Their current offer of collaboration was motivated by self-interest rather than genuine family unity. I need time to think about this, I said finally. I appreciate your concerns and I understand the risks involved in the transition. But I'm not ready to make major structural changes without understanding current operations better. Marcus stood up abruptly, his frustration finally overwhelming his diplomatic facade. Fine, Alex. But don't come crying to us when everything falls apart. We offered you a reasonable solution and you chose to be stubborn instead of practical. Linda gathered her purse and folder with the dignity of someone leaving a disappointing performance. I hope you'll reconsider, Alex. We love you and we want what's best for everyone in the family." After they left, I sat alone in Bob's office trying to process the emotional and practical implications of their visit. My family had essentially given me an ultimatum: accept their management control or risk destroying the business through inexperience and incompetence. Their offer was both generous and insulting, acknowledging my legal ownership while dismissing my potential capabilities. The confrontation had also clarified something important about family dynamics that I'd never fully understood. Marcus and Linda didn't just doubt my abilities, they were actively invested in my failure. Success on my part would invalidate their assumptions about my competence and force them to acknowledge that their decades of dismissive treatment had been unfair and short-sighted. Patricia knocked on the office door at 11 o'clock, carrying another cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd witnessed family drama but was too professional to comment directly. "The department supervisors are confirmed for this afternoon's meetings. Also, Tom Harrison from the highway project called to request a site visit tomorrow morning. He wants to meet with the new owner and discuss the schedule adjustments." The mention of a client meeting reminded me that I couldn't afford to spend too much time analyzing family politics. Bennett and Associates had real obligations to fulfill, and those responsibilities were more important than managing my relatives' hurt feelings about inheritance arrangements. "Patricia, can you help me prepare for tomorrow's site visit? I need to understand the highway project details and Tom Harrison's concerns before I meet with him." She smiled for the first time since I'd arrived that morning, a genuine expression that suggested relief about my focus on business rather than family drama. "Absolutely. I'll pull all the project files and prepare a briefing summary. Tom's a good client, but he's also very detail-oriented and expects straight answers to technical questions." As Patricia left to gather project documentation, I realized that my approach to the ownership transition had been clarified by Marcus and Linda's ultimatum. I could either spend my energy trying to prove myself to family members who were invested in my failure, or I could focus on learning the business and building relationships with employees and clients who were willing to give me a fair chance. The choice seemed obvious when framed that way, but it also meant accepting that my relationship with Marcus and Linda might never recover from this conflict. They'd made it clear that they viewed my inheritance as a mistake that needed to be corrected rather than an opportunity that deserved support. But as I began reviewing the highway project files Patricia had prepared, I felt something I'd rarely experienced in family contexts: genuine excitement about a professional challenge. The construction business was complex and demanding, but it was also logical and measurable. Success would be determined by project completion, client satisfaction, and financial performance rather than family politics or personal grudges. That afternoon's meetings with department supervisors would be my first real test as Bennett and Associates owner. These were the people who actually built the projects, managed the crews, and maintained client relationships. Their assessment of my leadership potential would be based on competence and character rather than inheritance documents or family connections. For the first time since Friday's will reading, I felt confident about my ability to honor Grandpa Bob's faith in my potential. The learning curve would be steep and the challenges significant, but I had skills and experience that were relevant to construction management. More importantly, I had something my family apparently lacked: genuine respect for the employees and clients who made Bennett and Associates successful. The question now was whether I could demonstrate that respect effectively enough to earn their trust and support during the transition period. If I could accomplish that, the business would succeed regardless of my family's predictions about inevitable failure. Part 4: Rising from the ashes. The highway construction site stretched for 3 miles along State Route 37, a ribbon of torn earth and orange traffic cones that would eventually connect Cedar Falls to the interstate system. Tom Harrison, the project engineer from the Ohio Department of Transportation, stood beside his pickup truck reviewing blueprints when I arrived at 6:30 Tuesday morning. The early meeting time had been his suggestion, designed to avoid peak traffic and allow for thorough site inspection. Harrison was a man in his early 50s with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin that spoke of decades spent on construction projects rather than behind office desks. He wore steel-toed boots, a hard hat marked with ODOT logos, and the practical clothing of someone who understood that construction sites were working environments rather than corporate showrooms. His initial handshake was firm but reserved, the greeting of a professional waiting to form opinions based on demonstrated competence. Alex Bennett, he said, studying my face as if trying to reconcile my appearance with his expectations. I worked with your grandfather for over 15 years. Bob was one of the most reliable contractors I ever dealt with. I'm hoping that quality runs in the family. The comment carried both encouragement and challenge, establishing that Harrison's loyalty was to project success rather than family relationships. He'd judge my capabilities based on performance rather than inheritance, which felt both fair and terrifying given my limited construction experience. Jamie Collins had arrived at the site before either Harrison or me, his pickup truck parked near the staging area where Bennett and Associates equipment waited in neat rows. Jamie's presence surprised me until I remembered that he'd remained friendly with several company employees despite starting his own competing business. His attendance at this morning's meeting suggested that industry relationships in Cedar Falls were more collaborative than competitive. Jamie volunteered to provide technical backup for this morning's discussion, Harrison explained. He knows this project's history and can help answer detailed questions about the work completed so far. I appreciated Jamie's support, but his presence also highlighted my need for assistance with basic construction terminology and project management concepts. Harrison had essentially arranged for a translator to help me communicate effectively about work that should have been familiar to any construction company owner. The three of us walked the length of the active work zone, stopping frequently while Harrison pointed out completed sections, current challenges, and upcoming phases of the project. The scale was overwhelming, involving drainage systems, road base preparation, asphalt installation, and bridge construction that required coordination between multiple crews and precise timing to maintain traffic flow. Harrison's questions began simply but grew progressively more technical as he assessed my understanding of construction processes. He asked about soil compaction testing, aggregate quality specifications, and equipment scheduling protocols that would determine project timeline and budget compliance. My answers revealed both my inexperience and my willingness to admit knowledge gaps rather than bluffing my way through conversations. Alex, Harrison said after we'd completed the site tour, I'm going to be direct with you because this project is too important for diplomatic language. Your grandfather understood every aspect of highway construction from subgrade preparation to final striping. He could estimate material quantities, schedule crew rotations, and troubleshoot equipment problems based on 40 years of experience. You're starting from essentially zero knowledge. The assessment was accurate but not necessarily fatal to our working relationship. Harrison's tone suggested evaluation rather than dismissal, professional concern rather than personal judgment. He was identifying challenges that needed to be addressed rather than declaring them insurmountable. Jamie stepped into the conversation with information that provided crucial context for Harrison's concerns. Alex has been managing complex logistics operations for several years at the regional distribution center. The skills aren't identical to construction management, but they're related. He understands scheduling, resource allocation, and coordination between multiple work crews. Harrison nodded thoughtfully, apparently reassured by Jamie's endorsement of my transferable experience. That's helpful background. Logistics management is definitely relevant to construction project control. But you'll need to learn construction-specific knowledge quickly because this highway contract has tight deadlines and quality specifications that don't allow for extended learning curves. The conversation continued for another hour, covering technical details about upcoming work phases, potential weather delays, and coordination requirements with utility companies and other contractors. Harrison's questions tested my ability to understand complex project interdependencies and make decisions that balanced competing priorities like cost control, schedule compliance, and quality standards. By the end of our meeting, I felt both overwhelmed and energized by the complexity of highway construction management. The project required knowledge and skills I didn't possess, but it also represented exactly the kind of systematic problem solving that appealed to my analytical mind. Success would require learning quickly and making sound decisions based on incomplete information, challenges that were familiar from warehouse management even if the technical context was different. Harrison's final comments provided both encouragement and warning. Alex, I think you have potential to grow into this role, but the next 6 months will be critical. I need to see evidence that you're learning the technical aspects and building relationships with crew chiefs and subcontractors. If project quality or schedule starts to suffer, I'll have to consider alternative contractor arrangements. The ultimatum was fair but daunting. Harrison was giving me a probationary period to prove my competence, but he was also establishing clear performance standards that would determine whether Bennett Associates retained its most valuable contract. Failure wouldn't just mean personal embarrassment, it would jeopardize the company's financial future and employee job security. Jamie offered to drive me back to the office, providing an opportunity for private conversation about the morning's revelations and my prospects for success in the construction industry. His pickup truck smelled like coffee and cigarettes, with blueprints and measuring tools scattered across the dashboard in organized chaos that seemed characteristic of construction professionals. "Tom Harrison is tough but fair," Jamie said as we navigated morning traffic toward downtown Cedar Falls. "If he says you have potential, that's significant. He's worked with dozens of contractors over the years and he doesn't give encouragement lightly." I appreciated Jamie's reassurance, but I was also concerned about the steep learning curve Harrison had identified. How do I acquire 15 years of construction knowledge in 6 months? Some of those technical questions this morning might as well have been in a foreign language. Jamie laughed, but not unkindly. "Alex, nobody expects you to become Bob Bennett overnight. The key is surrounding yourself with experienced people and listening to their advice. Your grandfather was successful because he hired good supervisors and trusted their expertise while making strategic decisions about project direction." The advice made sense but also highlighted another challenge I'd been avoiding: personnel management in a family business where some employees might question my authority or competence. The department supervisor meeting scheduled for this afternoon would reveal whether Bennett Associates staff were willing to support my leadership or whether they'd prefer working for family members with established industry credentials. When we arrived at the office, Patricia Wong was handling a minor crisis involving equipment breakdowns and crew scheduling adjustments that required immediate attention. A hydraulic excavator had developed mechanical problems at the residential development site, forcing project delays while replacement equipment was arranged. The situation tested my ability to make quick decisions with financial implications and client relationship consequences. Patricia explained the options with characteristic efficiency. "We can rent a replacement excavator for $800 per day until ours is repaired, which might take a week. Or we can reschedule the crew to work on other project phases, but that creates timing problems with the concrete pour scheduled for Thursday." The decision required balancing immediate costs against schedule disruptions and client satisfaction concerns. Rental equipment was expensive but maintained project momentum. Crew rescheduling was cheaper but created potential complications that might be more costly in the long term. I chose the rental option, prioritizing client relationships over short-term cost savings. Patricia nodded approvingly at my decision. That's what Bob would have chosen. He always said that reputation was more valuable than immediate profits, and clients remember contractors who keep projects moving forward despite unexpected problems. Her endorsement felt like passing a small test, evidence that my decision-making process aligned with the company culture Bob had established. But it also reminded me that every choice I made would be compared to my grandfather's approach, creating pressure to maintain standards established over 4 decades of successful business operations. The afternoon's department supervisor meetings provided crucial insights into Bennett Associates' organizational structure and the personalities who actually manage daily operations. These were the people who supervised work crews, coordinated with subcontractors, and solved technical problems that determined project success or failure. Their assessment of my leadership potential would be based on competence rather than family relationships. Robert Chen, the senior project manager, was a soft-spoken man in his early 40s with engineering credentials and 15 years of construction experience. He managed the commercial building projects and served as the company's technical expert for complex structural work. Chen's questions focused on my willingness to delegate technical decisions to qualified staff while maintaining oversight of budget and schedule issues. Alex Chen said during our private meeting, "I respect that you want to learn the technical aspects of construction management, but please don't feel like you need to micromanage decisions that require specialized engineering knowledge." Bob was successful because he hired qualified people and trusted their expertise while focusing on client relationships and strategic planning. His advice echoed Jamie's earlier comments about the importance of delegation and teamwork in construction management. Success apparently required recognizing the limits of my own knowledge while building systems that leveraged other people's expertise effectively. Maria Rodriguez, the office administrator who managed payroll, insurance, and regulatory compliance, presented a different perspective on company operations. Her concerns focused on maintaining financial controls and ensuring that project budgets aligned with actual costs and revenue projections. Rodriguez had worked for Bennett Associates for 8 years and understood the business systems that kept operations profitable. The construction industry operates on thin margins. Rodriguez explained small cost overruns on multiple projects can eliminate annual profits quickly. Bob was very disciplined about tracking expenses and controlling scope creep that clients sometimes request without understanding the budget implications. Her warning highlighted another area where my inexperience could create expensive problems. Construction projects apparently involved constant negotiations between client desires, budget constraints, and technical feasibility. Successful project management required balancing these competing priorities while maintaining profitability and client satisfaction. The most challenging conversation was with Frank Morrison, the equipment maintenance supervisor who'd worked for Bennett Associates for over 20 years. Morrison was a man in his late 50s with grease-stained hands and the practical wisdom that came from keeping complex machinery operational under demanding conditions. His initial skepticism about my qualifications was obvious but not hostile. "Alex, I'll be straight with you," Morrison said. "Equipment maintenance isn't glamorous, but it's critical to profitability. When machines break down, projects stop and money gets wasted on rental equipment and crew delays." Bob understood that preventive maintenance was cheaper than emergency repairs, and he supported my requests for parts and service even when they seemed expensive. Morrison's message was clear: he expected continued support for equipment maintenance budgets despite pressure to reduce costs during the ownership transition. His loyalty was to operational efficiency rather than personal relationships, but he was willing to work with me if I demonstrated respect for his expertise and operational requirements. By the end of Tuesday's meetings and site visit, I had a clearer understanding of both the opportunities and challenges facing Bennett Associates during the ownership transition. The company had strong client relationships, experienced staff, and profitable contracts that provided a solid foundation for continued success. But success also required technical knowledge and industry relationships that would take months or years to develop. Wednesday morning brought unexpected validation when Tom Harrison called to discuss the highway project meeting. His tone was noticeably warmer than it had been during our site inspections, suggesting that my performance had exceeded his initial expectations. "Alex, I wanted to follow up on yesterday's conversation. I was impressed by your willingness to ask questions and admit knowledge gaps rather than pretending to understand things you hadn't learned yet. That kind of honesty is rare in the construction industry, and it suggests you'll make sound decisions based on accurate information rather than assumptions." Harrison's endorsement felt like earning a professional credential, recognition that my approach to leadership was compatible with construction industry standards despite my limited technical experience. But he also provided specific guidance about areas where improvement was most critical. "I'd recommend spending time with your crew chiefs and learning how they estimate project timelines and material requirements." Harrison continued, "Understanding the practical aspects of construction work will make you more effective at client communication and project management." His advice reinforced the message I'd been hearing from multiple sources about the importance of field experience and practical knowledge in construction management. Success required understanding not just the business aspects of project management but also the technical realities of building roads, foundations, and structures. Thursday brought the most significant test of my leadership when a safety incident at the residential development site required immediate response and decision-making with potential legal and financial consequences.
A newly hired worker had fallen from scaffolding and required emergency medical treatment, creating both human and regulatory concerns that could affect company operations. Patricia called me at home at 5:30 in the morning with news of the incident and instructions for meeting the ambulance crew and OSHA investigators at the construction site. The worker's injuries were serious but not life-threatening, but the incident would trigger mandatory safety inspections and potential citations that could delay project completion and increase insurance costs. The next several hours tested every aspect of leadership skills I'd developed through warehouse management and the construction knowledge I'd absorbed during my first week as company owner. Dealing with emergency responders, insurance investigators, and regulatory officials required calm decision-making under pressure while maintaining concern for employee welfare and company liability. Frank Morrison proved invaluable during the crisis, providing technical expertise about safety protocols and equipment specifications that helped demonstrate company compliance with industry standards. His support during the investigation suggested that I'd earned at least provisional acceptance from one of the company's most experienced supervisors. The incident also revealed something important about company culture that Marcus and Linda had apparently never understood. Bennett and Associates employees were willing to support leadership that demonstrated genuine concern for their welfare and safety, but they expected competence and reliability in return. My response to the safety crisis had apparently met their standards for both qualities. By Friday afternoon, I'd survived my first week as owner of Bennett and Associates Construction without any major disasters or client cancellations. The highway project remained on schedule, the residential development was recovering from the safety incident delays, and the commercial building renovation was proceeding according to plan. More importantly, key employees seemed willing to work with me despite my inexperience. The week had also clarified the fundamental difference between my approach to business management and my family's assumptions about leadership requirements. Marcus and Linda had viewed construction management as some mystical art that required secret knowledge unavailable to outsiders. But successful project management apparently depended more on systematic organization, clear communication, and respect for employee expertise than on technical knowledge that could be learned over time. Saturday morning brought a phone call from David Richardson with news that would
fundamentally change the dynamics of my family relationships. The attorney's tone was professional but urgent, suggesting developments that required immediate attention. Alex, I need to inform you about some legal actions your family members have initiated. Marcus and Linda have filed a petition challenging your grandfather's will on grounds of mental incompetence and undue influence. They're claiming that Bob wasn't capable of making sound decisions when he executed the inheritance documents. The news was devastating but not entirely surprising given their ultimatum earlier in the week. My family had chosen legal warfare over accepting Bob's inheritance decisions, forcing me to defend not just my ownership of Bennett and Associates, but also my grandfather's mental competence and character. Richardson continued with details about the legal process and timeline for resolving the will contest. These cases typically take 6 to 12 months to resolve, during which time your ownership status remains uncertain. That uncertainty could affect client relationships, employee confidence, and bank financing for company operations. The legal challenge represented exactly the kind of prolonged conflict that could destroy Bennett and Associates regardless of who ultimately won the inheritance dispute. Clients would hesitate to sign new contracts with a company whose ownership was in dispute. Employees would look for more stable employment opportunities. Suppliers might demand cash payments instead of extending credit terms. But Richardson also provided strategic advice that offered hope for minimizing the damage from family legal warfare. Alex, the strongest defense against will contest claims is evidence that you're managing the business competently and maintaining operational continuity. If you can demonstrate that Bob's decision was sound based on your actual performance, that undermines their arguments about mental incompetence. The strategy required proving myself through business results rather than legal arguments, transforming the inheritance dispute into a performance evaluation that would determine both my personal future and the company's survival. Success would validate Bob's faith in my abilities, while failure would confirm my family's predictions about inevitable disaster. Monday morning brought unexpected support from an unlikely source when several Bennett Associates employees approached me collectively to express their backing during the legal dispute. The group included Robert Chen, Maria Rodriguez, Frank Morrison, and 3 crew chiefs whose respect carried significant weight within the company culture. Chen served as their spokesperson, delivering a message that provided both encouragement and responsibility. Alex, we've been talking among ourselves about the family situation and the legal challenges you're facing. We want you to know that we support your leadership, and we're committed to maintaining company operations regardless of what happens with the will contest. Their loyalty was based on my performance during the first week rather than family relationships or legal documents, evidence that I'd earned provisional acceptance from the people who actually built Bennett Associates' reputation for quality work and client service. But their support also created obligations to justify their confidence through continued competent leadership. Maria Rodriguez provided practical information about employee concerns and company stability during the legal dispute. People are worried about job security and whether the legal problems will affect project completion or payroll reliability. If you can maintain normal operations and communication, most employees will stick with the company through the uncertainty. Her advice highlighted the importance of transparency and consistency during the inheritance dispute, maintaining business routines that demonstrated confidence and competence despite family conflict. Employees needed evidence that their jobs were secure and that company operations would continue normally regardless of legal outcomes. The next 6 months would test every aspect of leadership skills I'd developed through warehouse management and construction knowledge I'd acquired during my brief tenure as Bennett Associates owner. Success would require maintaining project schedules, client relationships, and employee confidence while defending my inheritance against family members who were determined to prove my incompetence. But as I stood in Bob's office that Monday morning, surrounded by photographs documenting 40 years of successful construction projects, I felt something I'd rarely experienced in family contexts: genuine confidence about my ability to honor his legacy. The old man had seen potential in me that others had missed or dismissed, and he'd trusted me with something he'd spent 4 decades building. Whether I was worthy of that trust remained to be proven, but I was no longer the warehouse worker whose family considered him incapable of handling complex responsibilities. I was Alex Bennett, owner of a construction company, employer of 50 people, and guardian of a legacy built on honest work and fair treatment of others. The legal battle ahead would determine whether I could keep what Bob had given me, but it wouldn't change who I'd become in the process of accepting his challenge. The highway project was waiting, client relationships needed attention, and employees were counting on steady leadership during uncertain times. My family could fight their legal battle while I focused on the work that actually mattered: building roads, completing projects, and proving that Bob Bennett's faith in my potential had been justified by results rather than family connections. 8 months after my grandfather's funeral, I stood in the same courthouse where my family had tried to destroy me, but this time the judge was reading a very different verdict. The will contest that Marcus and Linda had filed with such confidence had crumbled under the weight of evidence I'd spent months carefully documenting. Their claims of mental incompetence and undue influence had been thoroughly dismantled by testimony from Bob's doctors, business associates, and the employees who'd watched me transform Bennett Associates from a family-run operation into the most respected construction company in 3 counties. Judge Patricia Martinez had spent 2 hours reviewing the evidence before delivering her final ruling. The court finds no evidence of mental incompetence or undue influence in Robert Bennett's estate planning decisions. The will stands as written, and Alexander Bennett's ownership of Bennett Associates Construction is confirmed and upheld. The legal victory felt hollow after months of depositions, document reviews, and character assassinations that had permanently damaged whatever remained of my family relationships. But it also represented vindication of both my grandfather's judgment and my own capabilities, proof that his faith in my potential had been justified by measurable results, rather than sentimental favoritism. Marcus and Linda sat across the courtroom aisle with their attorney, wearing expressions of defeated anger that suggested they still couldn't accept the reality of their loss. Their legal challenge had cost them over $60,000 in attorney fees while strengthening my position as company owner. More importantly, their public attack on Bob's mental competence had damaged their reputations within the Cedar Falls business community. David Richardson gathered his documents with the satisfaction of an attorney who'd never doubted the case outcome. Alex, congratulations on this victory, but more importantly, congratulations on what you've accomplished with the company during these past 8 months. The judge's decision today was based as much on your demonstrated competence as on the legal validity of your grandfather's will. The business transformation Richardson referenced had been the most challenging and rewarding experience of my professional life. Bennett Associates had not only survived the ownership transition and legal uncertainty, but had thrived under my leadership. The highway project had been completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule and $10,000 under budget, earning commendations from both the state transportation department and local media coverage that attracted new clients. But the real measure of success was visible in the company's financial statements and employee satisfaction surveys that painted a picture of organizational growth and cultural improvement. Annual revenue had increased by 30% through strategic bidding on larger projects and improved operational efficiency. Employee turnover had dropped to near zero, as I'd implemented profit-sharing programs and safety improvements that demonstrated genuine concern for worker welfare. The residential development, that had been plagued by soil issues and safety concerns, was now Cedar Falls' most sought-after housing community, with all 47 homes sold before construction completion. The commercial building renovation had been featured in a regional architecture magazine as an example of historic preservation done with modern construction techniques. 3 new municipal contracts had been awarded based on Bennett Associates' reputation for quality work and reliable project management. Tom Harrison had become one of my strongest professional advocates, recommending Bennett Associates for highway projects throughout the region and serving as a character witness during the will contest proceedings. His testimony about my learning curve and leadership development had been particularly damaging to my family's claims about my incompetence. Alex Bennett transformed himself from a construction novice into one of the most competent project managers I've worked with in 20 years, Harrison had told the court. His willingness to learn, delegate appropriately, and maintain high standards while treating employees and subcontractors fairly represents exactly the kind of leadership the construction industry needs. Patricia Wong had also testified on my behalf, describing the organizational improvements and cultural changes that had occurred under my ownership. Her detailed records of client satisfaction scores, employee retention rates, and safety performance metrics had provided objective evidence of company success that contradicted my family's predictions about inevitable failure. When Alex took over the company, I was concerned about continuity and stability, Patricia had testified. But within 6 months, it became clear that he'd brought fresh perspectives and systematic approaches that actually improved our operations. Bob Bennett would be proud of what his grandson has accomplished. The most powerful testimony had come from Frank Morrison, whose initial skepticism about my qualifications had evolved into genuine respect for my leadership approach. His endorsement carried particular weight because of his long history with the company and his reputation for blunt honesty about management decisions. Alex earns respect the right way, through competence and fair treatment of people, Morrison had told the judge. He listens to advice, makes sound decisions, and takes responsibility for results. That's more than I can say for some family members who thought they deserved to run the company without proving they could handle the responsibility. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that morning 8 months earlier, when I'd sat outside the funeral home, dismissed by my family and uncertain about my future. The warehouse worker who'd been excluded from succession planning discussions had become the owner of a thriving construction empire worth over $4 million. But the financial success was less important than the personal transformation that had occurred during the legal battle and business transition. I'd discovered capabilities and confidence I'd never known I possessed, developing leadership skills that had earned respect from employees, clients, and industry professionals who judged performance rather than family connections. The drive back to the Bennett Associates office took me past construction sites where crews wearing our company logo were building the infrastructure that would serve Cedar Falls for generations. The highway project had opened new commercial development opportunities that were generating additional contracts for roads, utilities, and building construction. The company's reputation for quality work and ethical business practices had created a pipeline of opportunities that would sustain growth for years to come. When I arrived at the office, Patricia had prepared a celebration that reflected the family atmosphere we'd built among company employees. The conference room was decorated with balloons and a banner reading "Congratulations, Boss," while coffee and cake waited on the table where I'd once spread out project documents trying to understand my grandfather's business. The entire office staff was present, along with several crew chiefs and equipment operators who'd taken time from their projects to acknowledge the legal victory. Their presence represented validation that meant more than any court decision, recognition from the people whose livelihoods depended on my leadership decisions. Robert Chen raised his coffee cup in a toast that summarized the collective sentiment. To Alex Bennett, who proved that leadership isn't inherited, it's earned. And to Bob Bennett, who saw potential that the rest of us learned to recognize. Maria Rodriguez had prepared a financial summary that documented the company's growth during the 8 months of legal uncertainty. Despite all the distractions and stress from the will contest, we've had our most profitable year in company history. Revenue is up 32%, profit margins have improved by 8%, and our client satisfaction ratings are at all-time highs. The numbers were impressive, but they also represented something more important than financial success. Every project completed on time and under budget was evidence that Bob's faith in my abilities had been justified. Every satisfied client and loyal employee was proof that his decision to entrust me with his legacy had been sound judgment rather than sentimental favoritism. Frank Morrison approached me after the celebration, carrying a manila envelope that contained something he'd apparently been saving for this moment. "Alex, your grandfather asked me to give this to you if things worked out the way he hoped they would. I've been holding onto it since before the funeral, waiting for the right time." Inside the envelope was a letter written in Bob's careful handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before his death. The message was brief but profound, containing words that brought tears to my eyes and validated every struggle I'd endured during the ownership transition. "Alex, if you're reading this, it means you've proven yourself worthy of the trust I placed in you when I wrote my will. I knew the family would doubt your abilities and probably challenge my decision, but I also knew you had the character and intelligence to succeed if given the opportunity. You've always been the best of us, even when others couldn't see it. Build something worthy of your potential, treat people fairly, and remember that success is measured by the lives you improve rather than the money you accumulate. I'm proud of the man you've become and excited about the leader you're still becoming." The letter confirmed what I'd suspected about Bob's understanding of family dynamics and his deliberate choice to protect both me and the company from the kind of internal conflict that could have destroyed everything he'd built. His decision to keep me unaware of the inheritance plans had been strategic rather than secretive, designed to prevent the kind of manipulation and pressure that would have complicated the transition process. That evening, I drove to Pinewood Cemetery to visit Bob's grave for the first time since the funeral. The granite headstone was simple and dignified, engraved with his name, dates, and the phrase, "Builder of Dreams, Foundation of Faith." Someone, probably Patricia, had left fresh flowers that brightened the gravesite with color and life. I knelt beside the headstone and spoke aloud, sharing news of the legal victory and business success that I hoped would have made him proud. "Grandpa, we won. Not just in court, but in every way that matters. The company is stronger than it's ever been, the employees are happy and prosperous, and we're building things that will last long after we're all gone." The conversation continued for nearly an hour as I updated him on specific projects, employee achievements, and client relationships that demonstrated the company's continued commitment to his values of honest work and fair treatment. The highway project had earned recognition as the best managed construction project in state history. The residential development had become a model for sustainable building practices. The commercial renovation had preserved historic architecture while incorporating modern energy efficiency. As the sun set over Cedar Falls, painting the cemetery in golden light that reminded me of autumn afternoons when Bob had taught me to use construction tools, I made a promise that would guide my future decisions as company owner. "I'll never let anyone dismiss or underestimate people the way our family dismissed me. Every employee will have opportunities to grow and contribute. Every project will be completed with pride and integrity. And if I ever have children, they'll learn that respect is earned through character and competence, not inherited through family connections." The drive home took me through downtown Cedar Falls, where Bennett Associates had contributed to nearly every significant construction project over the past 4 decades. Schools, hospitals, municipal buildings, and commercial developments bore the invisible signature of my grandfather's work, creating infrastructure that supported thousands of families and businesses throughout the region. But the most important construction project was still in progress, the rebuilding of my own life and identity from the ashes of family betrayal and dismissal. The warehouse worker, who'd been excluded from succession planning discussions, had evolved into a construction industry leader whose opinions were sought by government officials, business organizations, and professional associations. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless. Learning construction management while defending against legal attacks and family hostility had required resilience and determination I'd never known I possessed. But the struggle had also revealed capabilities and character traits that might never have emerged under easier circumstances. 6 months later, Bennett Associates received the Regional Business Excellence Award from the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, recognizing outstanding achievement in customer service, employee relations, and community contribution. The ceremony was held at the Cedar Falls Civic Center, a building we'd helped renovate 2 years earlier under Bob's management. My acceptance speech focused on the employees whose expertise and dedication had made the company's success possible, but I also acknowledged the grandfather whose faith in my potential had created the opportunity to discover my own capabilities. Robert Bennett understood that leadership isn't about inheriting authority, it's about earning respect through competence and character. Every project we complete, every employee we support, and every client we serve, is a tribute to his vision and values. The audience that night included Tom Harrison, Patricia Wong, Frank Morrison, and dozens of other professionals who'd witnessed my transformation from uncertain heir to confident leader. But it also included some unexpected faces from my past, including Nicole, who'd driven from Columbus to attend the ceremony. My sister approached me after the presentation, carrying flowers and wearing an expression that mixed pride with regret. "Alex, I owe you an apology that's about 8 months overdue. I was wrong about your abilities, and I was wrong to support Mom and Marcus in their legal challenge. You've accomplished something amazing here." Nicole's acknowledgement meant more than any business award or professional recognition because it represented validation from someone who'd known me before the inheritance transformed my circumstances.
Her presence at the ceremony suggested that family relationships might eventually heal, even if they could never return to their previous state. "I appreciate you being here tonight," I replied, "but you should know that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. What happened during the will contest revealed things about our family dynamics that can't be unseen or ignored." She nodded solemnly, understanding that rebuilding trust would require time and consistent demonstration of changed attitudes rather than simple apologies. "I know, but I wanted you to know that I'm proud of what you've built here, and I hope someday we can have a real relationship again." Marcus and Linda had not attended the ceremony, their absence serving as a reminder that some family wounds might never heal completely. But their continued resentment was no longer my responsibility or concern. I'd built a new life and identity based on merit and achievement rather than family approval or acceptance. 1 year after the courthouse victory, Bennett and Associates employed over 80 people and had expanded operations to include 3 branch offices, serving different regions of Ohio. The company's reputation for quality construction and ethical business practices had generated opportunities for projects in neighboring states, creating growth possibilities that would have been unimaginable during the family-owned era. But the most satisfying development was the mentorship program I'd established to provide opportunities for young people interested in construction careers. The program partnered with local high schools and community colleges to offer apprenticeships, internships, and scholarship opportunities that emphasized both technical skills and professional ethics. The first scholarship recipient was Jessica Martinez, a high school senior whose single mother worked as a housekeeper while studying for her nursing degree. Jessica's essay about wanting to build homes for families like hers had moved me to tears and reminded me of my own journey from dismissed family member to successful business owner. At the scholarship presentation ceremony, Jessica's mother thanked me with words that captured the true meaning of success. "Mr. Bennett, you're not just giving my daughter money for college, you're giving her hope that hard work and good character can overcome any obstacle. That's the greatest gift anyone can receive." Her gratitude reminded me of Bob's letter about measuring success by the lives you improve rather than the money you accumulate. Building a construction empire was satisfying, but building opportunities for others to discover their own potential was truly meaningful work that would continue long after I was gone. As I stood in my office that evening, looking out at the equipment yard, where machines waited for tomorrow's projects, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from funeral betrayal to business triumph. The family members who tried to bury my potential alongside my grandfather's coffin had unknowingly given me the greatest gift possible, the motivation to prove them wrong and discover my true capabilities. Their dismissal and legal attacks had forged resilience and determination that enabled me to build something far greater than the company I'd inherited. Bennett and Associates had evolved from a successful family business into a regional construction leader that set industry standards for quality, ethics, and employee treatment. But the most important construction project remained ongoing, the daily work of building a life based on purpose and principle rather than family expectations or social approval. Every decision I made as company owner was guided by the values Bob had modeled and the promise I'd made at his grave to honor his legacy through action rather than words. The warehouse worker who'd been excluded from succession planning discussions had become Alex Bennett, construction industry leader, employer of 80 families, and guardian of a legacy built on honest work and fair treatment of others. The transformation had required 8 months of struggle and years of continued growth, but it had also revealed capabilities and character I'd never known I possessed. My family had tried to bury me alongside my grandfather's coffin, but instead they'd planted seeds that grew into an empire built on everything they'd said I lacked: competence, character, and the respect of people who judged performance rather than family connections. Their betrayal had become my foundation, their dismissal had become my motivation, and their predictions of failure had become the blueprint for spectacular success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.